Carolyn were two of a kind, successful, popular, and convinced that in each other, they had found their perfect match.
They seemed very much in love, and they were bound together by this drive to really succeed.
But success quickly turns to failure when an affair takes a dark turn.
It was in the middle of the night, no witnesses. It was truly a whodunit.
And later, Janine and Rob met late in life, but were convinced that they could make beautiful music together.
As a couple, they were a good match. He made her happy, and she made him happy.
But marriage hits a sour note when love turns to lies.
It raised my suspicion a great deal. It was very evident to me they were putting on a show.
Because two is company, three is a crowd, and one is a killer. I like a sensitive man as much as the next girl. But sometimes a woman is looking for a little muscle. But when it comes to romance, it takes more than brawn to show your partner who's boss. And these days, whether on the job or off the clock, it's often the woman who ends up on top. Ken and Carolyn Stahl were living the California dream. But for some people, a successful career and a loving spouse aren't enough to keep them from seeking out a little extramarital satisfaction. But while love can keep you young at heart, an affair can sometimes mean an early grave. No one could ever accuse Ken Stahl of being an underachiever. He's a successful doctor, an avid outdoorsman, and a busy philanthropist.
Ken was an experienced anesthesiologist in Huntington Beach, California. People liked Ken Stahl. They respected him. He had a good reputation as a doctor.
But even Ken would admit that he pales in comparison to the lovely Dr. Carolyn Oppie.
Carolyn was an optometrist in our office, and she was very well respected. And her reputation with her patients was very, very nice. She could calm a patient down in 2 seconds just with her, "How are you today?"
Anything that you could think of that was wonderful and good, that was Carolyn. I would see Carolyn talking to her flowers, very sweet, very soft, and that kind of was an example of who she was as a person.
Carolyn could work miracles with her famous smile, and when Ken first met her on the job at the local hospital in 1980, he knew he had met his match.
Ken was attracted to Carolyn just by her mere beauty. She was a beautiful woman inside and out, soft-spoken voice, very much so a lady, and I think anybody could really fall in love with her.
Ken was also looking for somebody stable, professionally and personally, and the fact that she was established appealed to him.
Truly magical what the affection of a successful woman can do for a guy's spirits. It can really make a man stand tall.
He wanted a wife, a friend, a partner, and somebody, most important, who his family liked. And Carolyn was the ultimate girl you could bring home to Mom.
Never mind that Ken's track record has been a little less than desirable.
Ken had been married twice before, and he was hoping that the third time was going to be the charm. They were married in Las Vegas after they had lived together for about a year. They seemed very much in love. They were a pretty well-to-do couple. They had a nice house, they went to parties. They were kind of your professional power couple in Orange County.
But just as their public image is reaching dazzling heights, deep beneath the surface, the first cracks in their marriage begin to appear.
The good times lasted only a couple of years, and then things soured. Ken and Carolyn started arguing a lot more. It was critically important to Carolyn to maintain this appearance of them as this happy couple.
Every marriage needs a little nip and tuck from time to time. But Ken's problems are much more than skin deep.
Ken was in his mid-30s when he had his first major coronary operation, and then just 2 years later, he had a heart attack. The health problems gnawed at Ken, and it made him feel like he really had literally no future.
A man's ego can be such a fragile thing, and for Ken, misery loves company.
As Ken became depressed, he also became very abusive toward Carolyn, and he would start, calling her fat and making fun of her and talking down to her.
Carolyn kind of exhibited some stress at that time. She'd gained a little bit of weight, and Carolyn was always trying to get in shape and look good and keep her husband happy.
As an anesthesiologist, Ken provides comfort to his patients every day. Too bad his wife doesn't get the same treatment. With his marriage crumbling and his pride deflated, Ken soon finds a little pain relief of his own.
A few years into his marriage, Ken met this receptionist at a doctor's office where he freelanced. Her name was Adriana Vasco. Adriana was a petite, pretty, 33-year-old single mom.
I think Ken maybe was looking for something, trying to fulfill a need of his own. Sometimes people just need more, and they need to be inflated.
The attentions of a younger woman can do wonders for a man's ego, but it can take a toll on his bank account.
In Ken, Adriana found somebody who could maybe help her out financially. Ken started out by just paying for lunch. Then he started buying bigger things, including the car that she drove.
They say money can't buy you love, but it can get you a pretty good rental. And for Ken, the passionate love affair is just what the doctor ordered. But he should be careful. Affairs can be murder on the heart.
As affairs go, this one was not very well covered up. Many of Ken's co-workers and friends either knew about it or suspected. He would come and take her out to lunch, and she was pretty open with her friends talking about it.
The rumor was in the office that Ken was having an affair, and it was just mind-boggling to me because Carolyn always maintained that everything was okay.
But Carolyn is no fool. If she's going to save her marriage, she is determined to confront the problem head on.
Ken was on the phone with Adriana one day,
on the phone, Ken?
And Carolyn grabs the phone and says, "Who is this?"
Give that back.
Who is this? Stay away from my husband!
Adriana says, "Hey, back off. We're just friends."
Give it back.
Hello?
Friends with benefits. But unlike her philandering husband, Carolyn isn't one to take her marital problems lying down.
Carolyn wouldn't take a step if she didn't mean it. Whatever she said that came out of her mouth is something that she meant.
And when she tells Adriana to back off, you can bet she means it.
Carolyn wanted to make her marriage work. It was something that she was going to make happen no matter what.
3 people in one marriage can be a tight squeeze. And before it's all over, the seams will tear wide open, leaving 2 in the grave and 1 with a lot of explaining to do. After 10 years together, not even a successful career woman like Dr. Carolyn Oppie Stahl can cure her husband Ken's cheating ways. Despite Ken's own self-medicating, a long-term affair with the young Adriana, his marriage to Carolyn stays intact.
Ken had a relationship with Adriana for more than half of his marriage to Carolyn. So clearly, Ken was pretty confident that Carolyn would never leave him because he knew she was determined to maintain the veneer of a perfect marriage. So he knew he can get away with a lot.
You know what they say, once a cheater, always a cheater.
He started having affairs with other women. Things were so bad that Carolyn came home one day and she found this other woman just there on the sofa. You know, threw her out of the house and said, "Ken, what's going on here?"
Really, Ken? Again?
Ken just took this sort of, hey, take it or leave it attitude.
And a woman as smart as Carolyn knows that if this marriage has any hope, something has to be done about the doctor's busy private practice.
They tried counseling. That didn't work. They tried arguing with each other. That didn't work.
I think Carolyn still loved Ken no matter what happened, and she was able to forgive and always try to move forward as opposed to looking back at what happened in the past.
And Ken knows that reconciliation will help him save face, not to mention a bundle on attorney fees.
He didn't want to potentially lose money in another divorce. His health was bad. He was older. He just didn't have it in him.
And there's nothing like a brush with mortality to take the wind out of a man's sails.
In the summer of 1999, Ken had the quintuple bypass operation, and it devastated him. He couldn't work, and Carolyn becomes the breadwinner. I don't think he could handle her taking care of him financially. It was a huge blow to his ego and his self-esteem.
As Carolyn tightens the belt at home, she can only hope that her husband will stop loosening his. Much to her dismay, she has a hunch that Ken's old flame, Adriana, is still in the picture.
Clearly, Adriana was one of the most important women in his life, somebody who he came back to over and over again.
For Ken, the only thing not in decline is his libido.
Ken and Carolyn had come to a place in their marriage where they were together but living very separate lives. But Carolyn wasn't ready to put up the flag. She was very invested in her marriage.
To smooth things over, on a chilly November night, Ken decides to take Carolyn out on the town to celebrate her 44th birthday.
I remember her telling me that she was going out for dinner with her husband, and she seemed very excited. She seemed like it was going to be a beautiful birthday.
I'm all for optimism, but something tells me it's going to take a lot more than a measly dinner date to turn Ken into a doting husband.
On November 20th, 1999, Ken and Carolyn went to dinner for her 44th birthday. They then took a scenic drive down Ortega Highway through the mountains. At some point, they pulled over.
It seems Ken has one last surprise in store for Carolyn. Only the surprise doesn't go quite as planned.
It was dark, it was cold, and it was just the two of them sitting there in that car. At some point, another car pulls up. A window was rolled down. And then gunfire. Later, a security guard on routine patrol pulled up next to the car, and it was very unusual because the car was still running, the headlights were on, and the driver's side window was rolled down on a very cold night. The security guard looked and made a gruesome discovery. Carolyn's body had been shot so many times. She was bleeding and bloody all over.
It appeared that Carolyn had tried to exit the vehicle and was confronted at the rear of the car. Her shoe was off, so she may have even fallen down. She was able to crawl back inside the vehicle, and then the fatal shot was to the back of the head.
But Carolyn is not the only victim that night. Next to her, behind the wheel, is the dead body of her husband, Ken Stahl.
Ken suffered several other gunshot wounds, but a fatal one was the one that was just to his left cheekbone area.
It seems Ken had a surprise plan for his wife that night, but fate had other ideas.
Ken was found in the car, slumped over, but still in his seatbelt. It looked like he had been somehow caught by surprise.
Ken's driver's window was rolled down, which was kind of strange because it was a cold night. So he lowered the driver's window to speak to somebody that he trusted.
Could someone close to the couple be responsible for murder? Surely I can think of one person with an axe to grind.
Infidelity is always a very compelling motive for murder. We're talking about emotions that are inflamed, hurt, and anger.
But Ken isn't the only one with a wandering eye. There's a fourth lover in this already crowded love triangle. And soon a deadly plot twisted with lust, greed, and jealousy will be exposed. You know, I've never been too big on birthdays. After all, age is just a number. But Carolyn Oppie Stahl has been looking forward to hers. However, before she has the chance to blow out the candles on her 44th, a romantic night out with her husband Ken ends in a brutal double murder.
This was very unusual. We're in southern Orange County, and two people just don't end up dead out in the middle of Ortega Highway.
And none are more shocked by the deaths of the prominent doctors than friends of the couple.
It was just heart-wrenching to think that something terrible happened to them. Why did this have to happen? What were they thinking? You know, why were they on the side of the road?
I remember a newscaster asking me if I thought Ken or Carolyn could have an enemy. And my first reaction was, there's no way Carolyn could. But perhaps maybe Ken.
Perhaps Ken's sexy side dish got tired of playing sloppy seconds and served up a cold plate of revenge.
We analyzed Ken's pager records, and we noticed on the day of their deaths, there was several pages to Ken coming from this 33-year-old female medical aide named Adriana.
Police think they have uncovered evidence of a love triangle, not to mention a classic motive for murder.
When we spoke to Adriana, she admitted that she had a relationship with Ken, but it wasn't a physical relationship, it was more of a friendship relationship.
Well, with friends like that, who needs lovers?
We immediately knew that there was something there. We could see right through her story.
Adriana told police that her friend Ken was helping her fix her computer and taking it to the computer store. It was very important to her, and that's why she called him so many times on the day of his death.
Hey, open your eyes.
Ken was her cash cow after all. Which brings up one small issue.
The problem with considering Adriana as a murder suspect is that why would she kill her sugar daddy?
Adriana isn't the type of girl to say no to a free meal, let alone cut off her own revenue stream. At this point, police could use a helping hand, and it comes from a very unlikely ally.
We identified a handyman that Ken had hired to do some maintenance work around his house. This individual had an extensive criminal history. He ended up being a born-again Christian. He thought it was the right thing to do, to come forward to the police and let us know that Ken asked him, if you wanted to kill somebody, how would you do it?
Turns out fixing things around the house wasn't the only job Ken wanted this handyman to do.
Ken said, I want to make this person go away, and this person is my wife.
At that particular time, then we started really focusing on Ken. Maybe this individual hated his wife so much that he'd have his wife killed.
And a close look at his finances certainly supports that theory.
We found that there was 2 large withdrawals from his bank account, totaling $30,000. That's certainly enough money to pay somebody to do a murder.
But if Ken wanted his wife killed, why did he turn up dead too? Police circle back to Ken's longtime lover, Adriana, the last person to call Ken before the murders.
At first, Adriana told police that she and Ken were just friends, and police knew that she was lying. And they kept thinking that the key to solving this case lay with Adriana Vasco.
And it's only a matter of time until Adriana fesses up to being more than just casual bed buddies. But that's not the only bombshell she drops.
Adriana told police that Ken had come to her and said, "Do you know somebody who could kill my wife?" And Adriana just happened to know that perfect person.
Dennis Earl Godley worked at the apartment complex where Adriana lived. He was a local thug, drug dealer, been in and out of county jails. People described him as a scary guy, that it was kind of crazy, that would do anything.
Even murder Ken's wife. But Ken forgot the first lesson in playing the villain. Beware the company you keep. When you dance with the devil, someone new is bound to cut in.
The plan was that Ken and Carolyn were going to go to dinner. They're going to drive up the Ortega Highway afterwards. They're going to pull off the side of the road and feign some type of car trouble. Godley was going to walk up on the vehicle, kill Carolyn, and Ken was just going to say it was a random shooting.
And if things went according to plan, Ken would finally get to be with the woman he loved. Only that's not how this fairy tale ended.
Adriana followed him all the way up to Ortega Highway. She said she started hearing shots. And then as she was driving away, she realized that Ken was dead too.
A final word to the wise for a man with a wandering eye. Just because she is the other woman doesn't mean you are her only other man.
Police were convinced Adriana and Dennis had a romantic sexual relationship.
And most boys don't like to share.
Godley definitely could have harbored some type of jealousies towards Ken because of his relationship with Adriana. Could have fed into his anger, his rage, and he decided, I want to kill this guy.
The doctor thought he had planned his wife's murder with surgical precision. But he made a fatal mistake, trusting Adriana Vasco. In November of 2002, Adriana takes her chances in front of a judge and jury, a gamble that doesn't pay off.
Adriana Vasco was convicted of first-degree murder in the death of Carolyn's second-degree murder. For Ken, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Dennis Earl Godley was looking at the death penalty. He didn't want to do that. So he pled guilty to the murders, and he's serving life in prison without the possibility of parole.
For Carolyn's friends, it's the closure they desperately need.
Our dear friend Carolyn, who had no clue what was going to happen, you know, to have that happen as a birthday celebration, that was just wrong. Just really wrong.
Carolyn deserved to be happy. She deserved to go on with a beautiful life. But I think Ken died of his own making. I think it was a poetic justice, and Ken got his in the end.
Keeping the spark alive in a marriage can be very hard work. It helps to find a woman who's good with her hands. After all, nothing a man can do that a woman can't do twice as well. And in high heels. Well, almost nothing. By all accounts, Janine and Rob were equally matched in life and in love. But in the battle of the sexes, not everyone plays fair. And when the truth is finally laid bare, the results can be deadly. With her 3 boys all grown up and out of the nest, 57-year-old widow Janine Sutphin is more than ready for a little me time. So in 1998, she packs up her house in Charlotte, North Carolina, and moves to Durham to start a new chapter in life.
My mom had been through a lot. My father passed away in 1994. She was absolutely looking for a fresh start, and she absolutely deserved happiness.
And nothing puts a smile on Janine's face like her love of the arts.
She was brilliant and creative altogether, and music played a huge role in my mom's life. She was a classical cellist. It wasn't until she moved to Durham that I really saw her explore that in a professional way by joining an official symphony.
Performing in front of a crowd is really nothing more titillating. Janine's new job as a book indexer seems almost staid in comparison.
It was a hard economy, and she was looking for something that she would not have to worry about getting downsized. And she wanted to get into indexing because it's a freelance occupation. So I agreed to take her on as an apprentice.
A nice job, a home all her own, and a side gig any musician would pine over. Janine has it all. Almost.
My mom had been married to my dad for nearly 18 years. Picking up as a widow, getting back into the dating scene was specifically hard for her.
Surely there was a gentleman caller that would show such an accomplished woman a little Southern hospitality.
Rob Petrick was a computer consultant. He had been recently divorced. He, too, moved here to North Carolina to find a fresh start.
My mom met Rob through a summer camp that the Unitarian Church hosts, and the relationship progressed pretty quickly.
With their zest for life and passion for the arts, it's almost uncanny how much these lovebirds have in common. From the moment they meet, Janine and Rob make beautiful music together.
Rob had a number of interests and hobbies that made him kind of quirky, like my mom. He was a huge CD collector with thousands of CDs. He was big into computer electronics, software development. As a couple, they were a good match. My mom certainly seemed in love. Within the first few months, maybe the first 6 months of dating, my mom had told me that Rob was going to be moving in with her.
One thing I've learned is that when you get a second chance at love, you take it. Not long after, in the summer of 2001, Janine and Rob tie the knot in a quiet ceremony.
It was certainly filling a void that had been in her life for a number of years. And so I was happy for her that she was so happy.
Sounds like a fairy tale ending to me. But every shining knight has a few chinks in his armor.
After surfing around on the internet one night, Rob came across the name of an old high school flame. She lived in Georgia. They hadn't seen each other for decades.
Ah, Ann Kepner, the one that got away. And wouldn't you know it, she's single. But not for long. Just a few clicks of the mouse and the 2 old flames are red hot once again.
They developed this relationship over the internet. It was a very quick whirlwind type of romance. But during that relationship, he never told Ann that he was married.
If a half-truth is a whole lie, then Rob is entirely full of it. Before long, the two decide to have a little high school reunion all their own.
Rob and Ann's relationship progressed very quickly. Like Janine, Ann was in her mid-50s. She was looking for companionship. Rob would often leave North Carolina for days at a time, and he would tell Janine that he was going on a business trip, but when in reality, he was going to visit his lover, Ann.
With a girlfriend in Georgia and a wife in North Carolina, Rob's been serenading one too many Southern belles. But this trio will hit a sour note when secrets are exposed and someone takes their final bow.
Janine was a smart woman. She was on to him, and she wasn't going to give up without a fight. The jig may have been up.
With the glow of the honeymoon phase barely extinguished, things are looking up for Janine Sutphin and her new husband, Rob Petrick. But when one side of the bed is cold night after night, a woman can't help but wonder if there is trouble in paradise.
See you soon.
You know, on the surface, Rob seemed 100% committed to his marriage to my mom. But Rob would go on these business trips to Atlanta for days at a time. But my mom was always putting on a happy face.
But behind the smooth veneer lies a cracking marriage. It seems money is flying out the door about as often as Rob.
Janine started having a lot of questions. Rob was going on these business trips, yet on the other hand, the bank accounts were drying up, the explanations were not making sense.
If there are two things I keep my eye on at all times, it's my man and my money. But lately, Janine seems to be having a hard time with both.
My mom was very consistent with her finances. When things like missing credit card payments and defaults were happening, it was alarming to her.
They say a fool and his money are soon parted, but Janine is nobody's fool. Rob is up to something and she knows it.
As the tensions grew between Rob and Janine, and they sort of seemed to be drifting further apart, and he was growing closer and closer to Ann down in Georgia. Their relationship was picking up steam.
And it soon becomes clear where all Janine's money is going.
He eventually proposed, and she said yes.
Too bad Ann has no idea that the position of Mrs. Petrick has already been filled.
Ann was thrilled. She had been through a bad relationship before. She was glad that she had finally found Rob. She was looking forward to the future with him.
But if dreams can come true, surely so can nightmares.
Ann never had a clue about Rob's real life. She had started looking for dresses, for a place to have the wedding. She was making all these plans for what was supposed to be the best day of her life.
But Rob is making plans of a very different sort. Whatever plot this professional groom has in store, he is certain to break one woman's heart. And when the truth comes out, one of them may just be inclined to break something of his in return.
My mom would have done anything to get through a rough patch in a marriage. She was a fighter, true and true, and she would never just give up on a situation.
Janine knows that saving her marriage will require some drastic action. And a strong, independent woman like her isn't going to play the victim.
I spoke to my mom on New Year's of 2003. She was quite optimistic about the new year coming, but she had spoken about overcoming some illness, the flu-like symptoms that had kind of kept her down over the past couple months. I had called a few times to follow up and talk with Mom, and Rob told me that she had been so sick she couldn't get to the phone, and she was feeling so tired she couldn't get out of bed.
Every lady needs her beauty rest, but there's no excuse for neglecting your obligations. Well, almost no excuse.
We were working on this presentation we're going to make to the local freelancers, and when I hadn't heard from her, I was concerned for her safety. I called, and Rob answered. He said she had the flu, couldn't come to the phone.
And when her boss receives emails from Janine, they lack a certain je ne sais quoi.
Began receiving these emails that didn't really sound like Janine. She had a chatty style in her emails. The emails were curt. They were just answers to my questions. And this went on for about 2 weeks. And I was commenting to a friend of mine that if this were a TV detective show, I'd be getting very suspicious.
As days grew into weeks, my brother and I started getting quite frustrated. My brother told Rob, I'm gonna come up and see her. You know, this is pretty alarming. We wanna be able to talk to Mom.
Then suddenly one morning, Janine was gone.
On January 22nd, 2003, Mr. Petrick had called and reported his wife as missing. He stated she had attended symphony practice and did not return.
It came as a pretty big shock that things had gone from her not feeling well and not being able to answer the phone to her physically being missing.
It certainly is quite an odd turn of events.
For weeks, Rob had been telling friends and family that Janine was sick or she was in bed and she couldn't get up. The next thing you know, he's reporting her missing, saying she'd gone to cello practice. It just didn't add up.
We did discover her car in the parking deck where she parked for symphony practice. Janine's cello was found in the back of her car. It was a very expensive instrument, so we didn't think it was a robbery. There was no evidence that she had ever went to practice. When we talked to everyone involved with the symphony, they simply said she wasn't there.
It was very clear that Rob's story of her mom gone missing was simply that, just a story.
But the story between Rob and his fiancée, Anne, is more like a fairy tale than a crime novel. Too bad this blushing bride-to-be is in for a very rude awakening.
She had no clue what she had gotten herself into, and she got much more than she bargained for.
Get more deadly affairs online. Anne Kepner is more than 30 years removed from her days as a high school senior. But after reuniting with her old classmate, Rob Petrick, she has a new lease on life and a wedding date in September. Everything is looking up for Anne until she glances at a news article and sees a familiar face.
Anne had been planning to marry Rob, and all of a sudden she sees this news account, realizes he's married to someone else. She was actually the other woman. She realized that he really wasn't who he said he was.
A picture may be worth 1,000 words, but for Anne, Rob's word is completely worthless.
We did locate a lady in Georgia who stated she had had a relationship with Mr. Petrick. She contacted us to say this is the same man I was engaged to be married to. She had fell hook, line, and sinker for his story, so I think she was as shocked as we were.
Back in Durham, Rob's beginning to look like suspect number 1 in Janine's disappearance.
Investigators went to Rob and Janine's house to search for evidence. During their search, the Durham police seized Rob's computer.
We did locate a lot of evidence that he had been stealing money from Miss Sutphin without her knowledge for his own personal gain.
But that's not all they find. One look at Rob's browsing history and it becomes obvious that his life online included much more than looking up old classmates.
He had done research on how to kill, how to dispose of bodies, and how to cover the manners of death that he was looking into.
Which means police now have some work to do.
They searched every square inch, inside and outside. The cadaver dog apparently picked up on a scent in the trunk of the car, in the shower, in the bedroom.
At that point, we did feel that Janine had met her death here.
If I were a betting woman, I'd say he's right. But when it comes to the law, it's best not to gamble.
The police had a lot of circumstantial evidence. They had the suspicions of the family and the friends. They had the evidence that they had taken from the couple's homes. But the one thing they didn't have was a body.
But no secrets stay buried forever. In May of 2003, nearly 6 months after Janine disappeared, police finally get some answers.
A body was discovered at Falls Lake in North Carolina. It had been disposed of at some point and had been located by fishermen there.
It was wrapped up in sleeping bags, covered in a tarp, duct taped at both ends in chains, weighting it down in the water.
As we were moving the remains, you could see human hair protruding from this tarp. The hair color was consistent with that of Janine Sutphin.
It's a tragic ending to a mysterious tale.
The medical examiner was able to identify the body through dental records and give the manner of death as most likely suffocation. Now, we did have a homicide. We did have a murder.
And with that one word, murder, hope is suddenly crushed into despair.
I try not to dwell on the thoughts of what led to her in that lake. What's notable about Janine is that in a million years, you wouldn't have expected this to have happened to a person like her.
It was quite a double-edged sword when we were finally told that she had been found. We could find some closure and we could lay our mom to rest, but it certainly closed the door on her ever returning to us.
The next day, Rob Petrick is arrested and charged with Janine's murder.
Rob had a lengthy criminal history. 10, 20 years worth of writing bad checks, stealing money. He had swindled a lot of people in his life, a lot of vulnerable women.
But a strong-willed woman like Janine was a bit too much for a man as weak as Rob to handle.
He thought that Janine was going to be the perfect victim, but Ms. Sudfin was finding out about the financial fraud that he had committed against her. He knew he was going to be prosecuted because Janine wouldn't tolerate this. He came up with what he thought the perfect scenario was, and he executed it to a T. We believe he simply suffocated her there at the house. He removed her to Falls Lake, wrapped her up, sleeping blankets, tarps, and disposed of the body.
And we all know who his next victim was most likely to be.
During the trial, Anne and several other women testified that they had been used by Rob, they had been conned, they had been swindled by Rob. So it set up this pattern that jurors could see that this wasn't just a one-time fluke with Janine or with Anne.
But in court, Anne is finally able to confront the man who betrayed her.
Rob decided to defend himself at trial, to act as his own attorney, because he thought he was smarter than anybody else. He was a narcissist. He thought he could get away with it. I think he found out very quickly that defending yourself in court on a murder charge is not easy.
In November 2005, the jury needs only 2 hours to find Rob Petrick guilty of first-degree murder. He is currently serving a life sentence in a North Carolina state prison.
My mom was a brilliant, vibrant, loving woman who did everything in her power to raise a loving family and to provide the best opportunities for her sons that she could. And my mom was an educated woman, but conned by a mastermind.
It just seems so sad that at the moment in her life when things were looking up for her, that it was all torn apart by him, by his malicious nature.
It just goes to show that a good man is hard to find, but a bad one, well, they're a dime a dozen.
Rob Petrick is nothing but a two-bit con man. He thought he could prey on vulnerable women. He thought he could manipulate people. He thinks he's smarter than everybody else. And he thought he would get away with it. And this time he didn't.
The problem with the battle of the sexes is that too often someone has to win, and someone always loses. In the end, it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. Getting away with murder is no easy task. And after all that hard work, it is only right that they get their just rewards.